Today we're going to explore Nokomis, Florida. Believe it or not, these hoods are in Sarasota County. Welcome to our channel. This has been a highly requested video. Nokomis sits right next to Venice, Florida, 5 minutes away from some of the most beautiful beaches in Florida. But when you are living in these neighborhoods, those beaches feel like they are 1,000 miles away. Now, I grew up in Naples, Florida, right off of US 41 in a mobile home park similar to this. So today's video is very difficult for me to make because I lived in these types of conditions for about 20 years of my life. And honestly, it's a period of my life that is difficult for me to even remember. To live in just a beautiful area, but to be stuck in this type of misery, I don't know the reception I'm going to get from the locals because they could be finally glad to be known to the world that this exists in Sarasota County, but they could also be hurt to know that it's being exposed as well. Because living in these types of conditions in an area this wealthy can sometimes be emotional and difficult to manage. So even I myself shed a few tears driving through here because it reminded me of all the misery that I lived when I was in Southwest Florida, so close to the beaches, but so far from the lifestyle. Today's video is a little bit difficult for me, but let's get into it. Nokomis is 98% white. These are the white hoods of Sarasota County. Just 2 weeks ago, a father and son were arrested. They had 2 pounds of meth in this neighborhood. And I noticed when driving around today that there were people looking for stuff. They were just going to different houses looking for something. And I'm pretty sure that this recent arrest likely left a lot of people without a plug. Living in these types of neighborhoods is an absolute nightmare. You have individuals who are constantly breaking the law, and whether it's code enforcement or law enforcement, the people here are constantly causing trouble. I know this because I've lived in places like this, and I see all the signs, cameras, fences, no trespassing signs are just a few of the clues of the hostilities that people in this neighborhood have to deal with on a regular basis. Unkept properties, individuals who don't clean their yards, don't cut the grass, leave garbage outside, all these things mound up anger against people in the community, and eventually people snap and they have enough. Living in these types of neighborhoods is a constant battle. Like any hood, you have your little corner stores. One particular person has had law enforcement called on his house 93 times. And that's really the reality of living in these neighborhoods. I remember people who almost on a daily basis were having some type of law enforcement situation or a code enforcement situation. It's really antagonizing to have to live in these neighborhoods and constantly deal with people who are simply a problem on a daily basis. These are individuals who are habitual line steppers and are constantly infringing upon other people to see what type of reaction you have. If you don't react, then they're constantly threading over you. And if you do react, how far and how many times? It's a never-ending battle, disputes over property lines, noise complaints. Living in these types of neighborhoods is an absolute nightmare, an experience that I lived myself, and that's why I mentioned when I drove through this neighborhood, it reminded me so much of where I grew up, and they really aren't good memories. Despite having barely 3,000 people, this area is home to dealers, murderers, and other types of criminals. Perhaps because these places are so small and anonymous, the people that live here may never receive the notoriety of somebody who lives in a larger, more known neighborhood, but the experiences, hardships, and struggles of living in a neighborhood this small, home to dealers, killers, and other types of criminals, is sometimes overwhelming. There are people that do the best they can and build new houses and fix up the houses they have, but many people are disabled on a limited income. Overall, the poverty rates for Nokomis aren't really that bad. But when you start to look at the crimes, code enforcement, the amount of times law enforcement's out here, the amount of people that are vagrantly walking around these neighborhoods, some of them look like they're mentally disabled and they're just out in the day's heat walking around, going from property to property, lets you know that living in this neighborhood is a constant battle. Literally 10 minutes away is the home of Stephen King, famous athletes. These are the types of people that live just a few miles down the road. Despite some of the most beautiful and exclusive places in Florida being just minutes away, sometimes these rich neighborhoods have a wall that separates the poor people from the rich people. On one side of the road, gated communities with golf courses, amenities, and on the other side of the road, misery that has existed for decades. Despite geographically being a small place, the news stories about criminals that live in this community seem to be endless. In an area of just a few blocks, you have 10 registered offenders, one of them who is homeless. It seems like most of these neighborhoods seem to have a few things in common. You may have watched my video about Daytona Pines, a similar neighborhood to this. Well, a large population of registered offenders means that living here with a family would be a very scary situation. Some of these streets have 2 and even 3 houses that are registered offenders. Rebel flags, registered offenders, these are all common things that these types of neighborhoods in Florida have. Poor mobile home parks where addictions, overdoses, and of course the looming threat of registered predators are always around the corner. With addiction, predators, and crime all around you, living in these types of neighborhoods really is overwhelming at times. I want to show you guys these news reports and these maps of registered offenders because every time I do a video on a neighborhood like this, there's always somebody who says they live here, it's safe, and they've never had a problem. But these news reports and of course these registered offenders are not made up information. These are real information aspects that we can use to gauge the reality of living in these places. But of course, at a simple glance, you can already see it. The neighborhoods are run down. The respect that people have for their properties, simple. You can be poor. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you have to be dirty. These properties are unkept and these properties are sometimes almost a reflection of the depression that the people living inside these homes are going through. A depression that I myself at one stage in my life lived. Again, I grew up in a place like this, and I understand what those no trespassing signs mean. I understand what those cameras mean. I understand what those black marks on the driveway mean. Neighborhoods that flood. At times, it feels like you're trapped in these places and you're never going to get out. And many of the people that live in these neighborhoods are embarrassed to live here. They don't want to see their car to be seen in these neighborhoods because even a lot of times when people live in these neighborhoods, they're embarrassed to have people find out or know that these are the conditions they're living in. And well, these neighborhoods are almost invisible. It's like they don't exist. If it wasn't for our YouTube video on this area, it's almost like if this whole place didn't even exist to the rest of the world. One reason I know about this neighborhood is because I look at the arrest reports for Sarasota County, and as I'm looking through the list of arrest reports, one city kept coming up time and time again, and I couldn't believe that a place that is geographically so small could produce such a large percentage of the arrests in Sarasota County. If you go to the Sarasota County arrest logs, you'll see that a large percentage of the people that are being arrested live in this small area. Despite the population here only being 3,000 people, it seems like those 3,000 people make up a good portion of the people that are constantly being pushed back into the Sarasota County Jail. This is the type of place you'd expect to exist in Pasco County, for example, but to think that this exists in Sarasota County is difficult to understand. But it's a place where the people are trapped in addiction, poverty, and crime, and many times because of the demographics of the area being overwhelmingly white, Many times people don't really pay attention to what happens in these neighborhoods. It's almost like if these places didn't even exist. Many other neighborhoods would have a lot more coverage on YouTube. There'd be people reporting about the things that are happening in these neighborhoods. But what I found interesting is that despite the fact a lot of the arrests and crime and news stories that come out of Sarasota County originate here, there isn't too much on the internet about this place. Even stranger is the proximity that this neighborhood has to beaches, Venice. You may have driven past this place dozens of times and never actually entered the neighborhood to know what was hidden back here. Again, one of the reasons I got put onto this place was simply looking through the arrest reports through Sarasota County and realizing, wow, there's a lot of people being arrested in this neighborhood. And sadly, this is one of those places that, despite having a lot of crime, doesn't seem to get a lot of notoriety for it. Even stranger is the fact that on one side of the road you have mobile homes like this, and on the other side of the road you have people who are literally millionaires. Again, the distance between the ultra wealthy and the ultra poor is almost non-existent. Some of the poorest neighborhoods come right up against some of the richest neighborhoods, and it's interesting to see how much proximity there is, yet how far apart these lifestyles are. The unkept properties, the 6-foot fences, all of these things are signs that the people living here are having difficulties with each other. Theft, noise complaints. If you were to go into the county and see the amount of code enforcement violations and complaints that some people put out, you can see their frustration at the people around them. Others just pretend like the world around them doesn't exist. They create a place for themselves and just ignore their surroundings. And despite everything around them falling apart, they seem to be completely immune to the madness. For me, I was one of those people that lived in a neighborhood like this and eventually fixed up their property and made it better. But the frustration of me being the person on the street with the nicest house while everybody else's property was going to crap is a frustrating notion. You'll notice in these neighborhoods, every once in a while you'll see a house where they really have a lot of pride. They're keeping it up and try to make it look as nice as possible. Those people usually have a very hard time, and everybody in that community hates them because, after all, who wants to see somebody trying to make something better when they're living in sadness and depression? Some people in these communities take it upon themselves to do the best they can to improve their lives, but it seems like poverty has a strong grip on them. For me and my wife, the final straw was when dealers moved into our neighborhood and there was junkies in and out all day. Between ourselves and other neighbors, we compiled hundreds of phone calls, and the law enforcement officers never did anything. We realized that the cops were never going to come into our poor neighborhood and shut down these houses that were problematic. This is where society has dumped their most undesirable people, and if you live here, you're forced to be among them. Trying to be a decent, law-abiding person in a neighborhood like this is almost an impossible mission. After all, law enforcement isn't interested in you complaining if you live in a poor neighborhood. But what's interesting about this area is that there's some very wealthy properties literally among the poverty. This area almost reminds me of Fort Pierce or Broward County, or many of the African American neighborhoods on the east coast of Florida. See, there's a street called Colonia Lane, which is something like that D Street in Fort Pierce, or perhaps MOK in some neighborhoods. It's one street that's kind of the front street for this neighborhood, and only the people from this neighborhood seem to come up to this front street. It's laid out identical to many of the older African American neighborhoods in Florida, in that you have this one street that's kind of for the community, and you don't really see too many white communities that have that. It's interesting that this particular street acts almost like what the MOK is to many African American communities. The similarities are striking. But then you leave on Colonia and you get to US 41 and you realize that just on the other side of US 41 are waterways, beaches, and people living a completely different lifestyle, close but so far away. I really appreciate the subscribers that we have in this part of southern Sarasota County. Thank you guys so much for requesting that I get out there and do this video. And I hope I didn't hurt any of your feelings with today's video. I know it's a touchy subject. For most part, this is a beautiful area of beautiful beaches. We've done videos along Casey Key, Venice, showcasing all the beautiful areas that exist in this part of southern Sarasota County. But I thought it'd be a great story to show that among all these beautiful areas, it's just one pocket that's living a completely different narrative. We've also done some YouTube interviews of homeless people in South Sarasota County, and it's blown up on the internet. Many people believe that because of the promotion that this area gets, that it's somewhat of a perfect place to live. Many people don't realize that in southern Sarasota County, there's a lot of homelessness. There's a lot of homeless camps, and there's neighborhoods like this. Many times when people move to this area, they only see the beaches and all the YouTube videos about realtors promoting beaches and all these fancy new communities. But when they move here and start to spend time in their communities, they figure out that there's homelessness, poor neighborhoods, and many other things that were never exposed to them properly through the YouTube videos they saw. So in today's video, we also want to inform people that are moving to this area that everything isn't perfect. In the future, I want to do some more homeless interviews in this area and get more stories about the people who grew up in a place that's beautiful and incredible, but also their situation wasn't the beach. It was the trailer park. It was the homelessness. It was the addiction. It's a narrative that exists in southern Sarasota County that really is almost non-existent. The fact that we've exposed some of these stories and put some of their stories out there has gained a lot of notoriety on the internet. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. The videos that we have done showing the other side of Sarasota County, the side that seldomly gets shown, has been captivating for the internet. People have really drawn into seeing, well, the side of Sarasota County that the realtors are definitely not going to show you. You may have driven past this area on US 41 between Venice and Sarasota, and you may not have noticed that back there are neighborhoods like this, and even some of the empty lots right on US 41 hidden behind the tree line are massive homeless camps. And many people who move to this area are trying to flee the same situation in states like California, and they realize, well, perhaps you may not see the homeless camps, but they're there, very well hidden, and it's almost, well, a fraud to these people that they think they're fleeing something, and they don't know that the thing they're fleeing exists in the place they're moving to. It's just really well hidden. And well, you could drive along the main roads here like many tourists do and not realize that in these wooded lots are people living homeless. Just a few blocks in the other direction where the tourists never go are mobile home parks and living conditions that are difficult. But again, as you're driving down the main path the tourists take, they'll never see this side of Sarasota County.